Welcome back to Mindkind Podcasts. This is Dr. Jo North returning to our platform. Mindkind continues to be a reflective space for anyone who wants to stay sane in our demanding world. Our intention is to inspire, motivate and inform people of all ages interested in mental health and well-being. I'll be drawing on 35 years of practice as a psychotherapist, and we'll be looking at research and therapy along the way and talking with other experts in the field so we can draw on their skill. Nothing in this podcast is intended to cause you shock or surprise. If you think a subject is going to cause any triggering to any conditions that you have, please don't listen and just choose another podcast of interest. If you happen to be in a podcast and something in there triggers some kind of anxiety or stress for you, please switch off straight away and contact your mental health professional. If something affects the mind, we'll be talking about it. So let's get on with today's podcast. Hi, it's me again, Jo North, thinking about the mind. If it affects our thinking and our emotions and our inner life and our experience of the world, then we want to think about it here. So the last podcast on mindfulness was just an introduction to help people understand the basis of this. It really is tried and tested and is an encouragement to get us more aware of the thinking that's going through our minds. And in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to stop and we need to be able to check out what our thoughts are. And I think that most of us say, oh, well, I'm not actually having thoughts, but you'll probably find that you are. Or that you can find a tone to those thoughts or a quality to those thoughts that will be influencing your mood or your thoughts. Okay, so today then is all about taking this a bit further and catching hold of the quality of our thinking. And I think that, as Maya Angelou has said, if we are knowing better, we can do better. And I think if we know our thoughts better, we can do better. It happens to us all that our mind gets busy and works on things and gives us a concern that something is going to be dangerous to us. And the major emotion relating to anxiety and a chattery mind, an excessively chattery mind, is fear, which leads to the other emotions of anger and that kind of enrage us, and we get caught up in fear and anger. And we start to have these continuous thought loops that are very, very uncomfortable for us. And so I really want to address that because I know it happens in my head. It will be happening in your head. And I know that it's the challenge of our lives right now. It's the challenge of young people, old people, everybody. Only little babies don't get their thinking act together. They just got their being act together and need a lot of support and a lot of comfort to stop their fear. But we tend to spend a lot of time, once we've got these cognitive processes in place, thinking about how fearful and how dangerous are things. And it's good that we do that, but so often we overdo it. And our brain is a little bit over helpful in terms of making us focus on fear. So let's get on and let's check out the quality of these thoughts in a little bit more depth. So around the turn of the century, around 1913 until about 2007, we were graced with the presence of Albert Ellis, who was a psychologist and psychotherapist. And he was considered to be one of the most influential group of psychotherapists in parallel with Freud and with Carl Rogers in the development of thinking about the mind. One of the things he graced to us was rational emotive behavior therapy, which is considered to be one of the founding sources of the current wave of cognitive behavioral therapy that we work with these days, in that we are saying if you change your thinking, you'll change your behavior and things will change in your mind. That's not all there is to say about the mind, by the way, and our minds aren't machines, but it has a very, very big impact on us if we can start to regulate ourselves by noticing our thinking. So I'm telling you all this with holding in mind that there are lots of ways to find regulation, and starting to notice thoughts is just one of them. But anyway, Albert Ellis, big tribute to him. He died only in 2007. And he developed this way of thinking. Essentially, what he noticed was that we tend to come up with irrational beliefs in our mind that hamper us and that get in our way and trip us up. And he left us a super list of potential irrational beliefs. So I'm going to read some of those to you. And if you see where you are with those, so we hold these in mind and we let our lives run by them. Whereas actually, our lives could be run by stronger values and more productive values. So, I must be successful, competent, and achieve in everything I do in order to be worthwhile would be a guiding belief that I think is very common these days. That people feel they've got to be achieving in order to be allowed to exist. And I think it causes a lot of exhaustion and contributes to a lot of anxiety and depression. So that would be an example of a belief that is going to hold you back because it's actually not true. So let me just say it again. I must be successful, competent, and achieving in everything I do if I'm to consider myself to be a worthwhile person. If you consider that, consider how much you think that thought and how true it is. It's not actually. I'm sure that a lot of people will like you just for being you, and that we can be so many other things other than just clever and competent. You know, we are social, we can be kind, we can be thoughtful, we can be imaginative, we can be creative. Being creative doesn't actually mean being clever and competent. So ask any artist and they'll tell you that. The most skilled artists don't go into their pictures telling themselves that they're clever and competent. They go into their pictures because they love pictures. And I'm sure that many times in the course of a production of a wonderful masterpiece, an artist will be thinking, oh, I don't know about this. And it's that little bit of unsureness that actually serves us. So you can see where we're going here. It's kind of like these guiding beliefs that we hold in our mind that are tripping us up and getting in our way. Let me run another one past you. I must be liked by everyone for everything I do. This is a kind of anxiety that is very common. If you don't get enough likes on your social media, people are getting upset. By the way, I don't have any social media at the moment apart from my podcast, and I actually don't have any likes. Well, actually, I might have a few for the little bit that I have got. But the thing is this, that it is actually a completely dysfunctional belief that we have to be liked by everyone, and it is also impossible to achieve. Not everyone is going to like you for everything you do. Enough people will like you for being you. Equally, that applies to all of us. And we need to teach children to live contentedly with the idea that not everyone perhaps in their class is going to love them or think they're amazing. That doesn't matter as long as they're not being mean or being violent or horrible or bullying. That does matter. But things like just being liked, it's really something we learn, is not so important. And we have to learn the resilience. And you will find, again, many successful people, like, for example, politicians or artists, again, you certainly don't go into politics to be liked by everyone. You go into politics for your core beliefs about creating something constructive for humankind. Well, mostly constructive, with possible exceptions. So there's an example of a belief that's not going to serve you. It's a pattern of thinking. So, if you just get those two in your mind and start to notice your life through the lens of those two ideas, A, you must be liked, and B, you must be successful, you'll start to see, hang on a minute, those things just aren't true. But more importantly, just notice how true they are for you. So take a minute right now and just ask yourself this question, maybe switch off the podcast. How much do you feel you constantly have to be liked? And how much do you feel you constantly have to be a success? And if you ask yourself that question, take a little bit of time to think, well, actually, can I just be good enough some days? Some days we just have to be just good enough. Let's go on to another irrational belief that we commonly hold. I love this one. It's easier to avoid facing life's difficulties than to face them. Now, that belongs with all of us, and we all want to run away from something that is difficult. And I can assure you that that doesn't work, unless, of course, as I always say, unless it's a dinosaur or something that's going to kill you, in which case do run away and do avoid like crazy. But on the whole, it's better to turn around and face problems and deal with them and increase your skill in doing that. So you'll increase your ability to regulate your feelings of anxiety. And I find so often that if I turn around and face something that I'm worried about, that I can find details that can help me manage that, and I can get to grips with the problem. I can talk with other people about the problem. I can share the problem. I can fall back on resources that will help me solve the problem. I think it's probably one of the biggest strategies in human nature that we have to keep an eye on. And that is, do we move closer to, or do we move away from the problem? And so, if you do nothing out of this podcast, please consider this one. Do we face our problems and deal with them, get someone to help us with them? More importantly, reach out to others and say, hey, can you help me with this problem? Or do we move away from it if it really does endanger us? And you'll get good at reaching out if you keep doing that. And it's very, very likely that something that is a problem for you will absolutely be a piece of cake or no problem at all for another person. Let's think of an example of facing a problem, a really common example. You will all know this. Rich or poor, you have to face your finances and you have to know what's going on with your money. And I do find that a lot of people get very, very understandably distressed if money's not going right for them. Now, we can't do anything about changing the amount of money that people have, although we can actually if we put that in as part of our plan. But initially, what we have to do is get a hold of the problem and get it down on paper and tell ourselves exactly what is going on with money. And if we know what is happening, we can then find what we need to do to resolve it. So every detail of every outgoing needs to be written down if you have an issue with money right now. And if it comes out in the minus, it really doesn't matter. If your details prove, yeah, there isn't enough, no problem. You've faced the issue and now you can start working at the solutions, and you can start going to debt managers and people who are going to help you to find solutions. So if you are that person right now, and we've all been there, don't despair, get the sums done, face it, and then get people to help you to find solutions. And there will be a way out. Can I recommend Mel Robbins' podcast? Probably one of the most popular podcasts on the planet at the moment. She's absolutely brilliant. And Mel is always telling people about her own debt levels, which were astronomical, and the way that she clawed her way out of debt. And she has also written a super book, which I'm always recommending, and I'll big up to her for it. And that is Let Them Theory. And it's very much based on the rational emotive guidelines, although I don't think that she has said that she drew on this particular theory, but very much of letting people think the thoughts they think, and then in fact you accepting that you have no control over them. So that's a very super read. But if you really want a genuine story about debt, go to some of the big people who are doing coaching right now, like Mel Robbins or Tony Robbins. They'll all tell you about their debt stories. I've got my own. You know, I can remember many years ago when I was bringing up my daughter on my own, having £3 to get through a weekend, looking in my purse. Those were in the days when we actually did use money. And saying, okay, there's 3 £1 coins in there and you're going to get through the weekend on that, because that is all there is. And one of the things I learned to do, I had so little money coming in, but I did learn the very, very fantastic art of cutting my cloth accordingly. And I don't think that my daughter will ever tell you she felt she went short of anything. And you asked me about, you know, cutting my cloth and living according to my income. I got very, very good at that. But I also got very good at making more income. So I know these stories and I love to hear them from people. And I do love to encourage people forward. So one of the amazing things I'm saying to you is, if we face up to the issue rather than run away, and if we get hold of the issue, and if we find a plan that gives us vitality and hope, not a sense of despair that this is it, life has now got a hold of us and we are finished. That's what I'm all about. I want to be a little bit careful because I'm not talking about veering towards continuous positive thinking, because that is actually a pretty unhealthy way to go through life. I'm talking about realistic perception and realistic thoughts to match that perception. Because what we're tending to do is distort our thinking and distort our perception. And we have a tendency to bias our thinking. So if your mood is generally a bit down, or if you're going through some depression, you will find that thoughts of failure tend to arise more easily. And thinking hopeful thoughts is quite hard work if you've got clinical depression. I'm absolutely aware of that. And that's why sometimes medication can be so very helpful. But what we have to do with people whose mind is veering towards the negatives, we actually have to help them to get their mind back in the habit of accepting at least hopeful thoughts, even if it's minimally hopeful, um, in the other direction, because our brain has an incredible flexibility to take on board the negatives, process that, and then adapt accordingly and come up with plans. That is the human mind at its most functional. It tends to, though, if we're depressed, get rather stuck in taking on the negatives and staying there. Now, I have to be a little bit careful when I see it with people and help them to walk across the bridge in the other direction to find helpful plans. And this can be through very, very small actions to improve their lives. My view and my advice on most things to people is just do a little something each day to improve the quality of your life, and you will start to veer in a more balanced direction. And again, I don't say that glibly. I know that can be extremely hard work when people are having bad times and they feel very troubled and that they can't get out of it. But we do have to help people move in the right way. And that's also true for people who don't have depression, because we can get into very panicky states, very anxious states, which ultimately will lead us to depression if they continue. But we need to find these little tiny steps forward every day. Just imagine 365 days in a year. If you took a tiny, tiny step forward each day, imagine the progress that you would make. And here are some examples of tiny, tiny things. Tidy half a drawer, not even a whole drawer. Clean your shoes, iron something in your wardrobe. Find one thing in your wardrobe, just one thing that you feel good in, and start to wear that. Stop leaving it in your wardrobe. Get it out and wear it. Go out and look at some flowers, or go out and sit quietly, or treat yourself to something nice, not rubbishy food. Don't get into that catastrophic thinking where, okay, well, it's all a big catastrophe, so I might as well go and eat two ultra processed pies and not even notice the consequences. That is not the step in the right direction we're looking for. We're just looking, okay, go and get something really, really lovely that makes you feel good. Stop each day. What have you done today to make yourself feel just good, just okay? Just like, hey, do you know what? You're in this life to enjoy it too. Then you will find that you'll be spreading that around a little bit. So these are tiny ideas, and I am all for them. Distract yourself. Listen to a great podcast. Distraction is brilliant. Sit down and watch a lovely, lovely program. Please, if you're depressed, don't sit and watch terrible horror shows and things like that. You need to be watching really pleasant stuff that makes you feel a little bit more pleasant to get that dopamine going in your system. So watch something that makes you laugh, or watch something that's, even quite mediocre, not where people are getting killed, and stay away from the news. Inform yourself by all means, but don't dwell on some of the dreadfulness. The problem is, I don't say stay uninformed, but you cannot do anything about things that are going on in far distant lands. You can make plans to to donate and do something, but you can't probably change that situation. Now, this is where we get stuck, and it's where things in everyday life can start to deeply, deeply affect us. So you watch out for that news. I make a policy of listening to the headlines in the morning, and then the radio goes off, because the rest is just chatter, really. If it's going to be something interesting, I'll listen to it. If there was some great news about, say, a war ending, I'm going to be plugged in for hours, because that's going to be fantastic news. But right now, I'm afraid it's all very, very sad and very negative. On the other hand, I could go and donate to help people who are suffering and struggling. So it's find out what you can do. It's when we feel stuck in our thinking, when we get into the negative loops, when we are going round and round and round in that endless thinking, that things start to go wrong. Our brains aren't made to feel stuck. We are made to find solutions. Maybe it might take a while. Don't worry about that. Okay, so you can be telling yourself you're on the way to a solution. You haven't found it yet. You just haven't found it yet. So let's look at some more thinking that tends to throw us in the wrong direction. So what we've been looking at there is the way that we take a negative focus on things. And we'll do that more often if we're depressed, but we will do it anyway. We will go to the negatives. And I was having an interesting conversation with a friend the other day and saying, have you noticed that does not get better as you get older? It probably gets worse. I think that as the mind and body start to degenerate a little, that the mind has to work harder to protect itself. And I think that might account for some of the negative focus that arises in old age, hence the expression grumpy old woman or grumpy old man. And to be perfectly honest, people in more senior generations like myself, we have to work at that and not let it get the better of us. Which is great. I love doing that. So we've been talking about a negative focus or a negative bias. Another generalization that we do in our minds is to make things totally awful or catastrophize, make a mountain out of a molehill, make things bigger than they are, anticipate, because our brains are constantly anticipating, which is a wonderful thing, actually, to keep us safe, but we sort of anticipate the worst if we're not careful. Alternatively, we might find ourselves constantly disappointed. But, what we have to do is put ourselves central and keep ourselves calm and experience life as it is happening in the here and now, rather than living by these sort of tendencies to catastrophize and make bigger. On the other hand, some people minimize and make smaller. And both, if we're not careful, can lead us in the wrong direction. So people that minimize often are completely taken by surprise when life is actually happening and they're not expecting it. And people who catastrophize, well, I suppose at least they can at least be glad if things don't work out as badly. But the thing is to deal with reality. And like I say, if it's a dinosaur coming to get you, get out of the way. Other than that, you need to be checking reality all the time. But with catastrophizing, you tend to exaggerate how awful or unpleasant they will be. And you overstimulate the brain to a sense of disaster. And every time you do that, you just need to check it out, because it will actually make you incredibly anxious. It is actually the thrust behind a lot of panic disorder, because who wouldn't have a panic if they thought everything was going to be awful? So watch out for that tendency to magnify or alternatively to minimize. So I see minimizing happen a lot around parent-child interactions, say where parents might minimize the impact of a child's behavior and not really see the reality of it. And therefore they are taken by surprise when their child comes up with some big piece of behavior that's going to be risky or harmful. So I would say, that's not a parent bashing comment, because I've got a lot of respect for parents and a lot of love for families who are only doing their best. But watch out for an accurate assessment of your child's behavior. Okay. So another thing that we tend to do is tell fortunes about the future. We turn into Gypsy Rose and we anticipate and give our ideas on what will be happening in the future. We interpret negatively, even though the facts might dictate otherwise. So you are a bit of a mind reader, and you might find that being a mind reader leads you into conflict with others if you're not careful. Now, to some extent, the problem with this idea, and it's not really a problem because it's a psychological phenomenon, is that we can mind read a little bit. I mean, we can, for example, anticipate if somebody's sad and they haven't told us, but we can get a sense of them being sad. We can anticipate if somebody's angry or distressed or even just downright happy. To some extent, we can mind read, but to some extent, we can't. And we often need to zone in and make more accurate interpretations. So, for example, you might see a grumpy face and you might mind read and think, oh, that person's grumpy with me. And it's probably often not the case. We all have a grumpy face at times, and it could be that we just didn't get a good night's sleep or something's going on for us. So we might overinterpret the faces that we see. So it's complicated. It's not a black and white thing. It's a nuanced thing. Yeah, we do mind read. No, we don't mind read. Here's us. So always with these thinking tendencies, we're checking it out all the time. And how do you check it out? You have to check in. You have to check in with yourself. You have to check in with people. You have to ask yourself, what's my tendency? Do I tend to exaggerate? So going with that is the way that we make judgments, basically. Simple. The mind is made to judge. Anyone that comes along and says, I'm a very non-judgmental person, I kind of know that they can't possibly be, because we're all judging things all the time. We're judging things for our own safety. We're judging every minute of every day. We're made to judge. But when it comes to people, I think we can make negative judgments very, very quickly. And sometimes in my work, I see times when we don't make negative judgments enough. We don't judge accurately or assess with the right information. So, yeah, of course, we're making judgments, but check out your judgments, check out your assumptions, because my goodness, we make those too, don't we? Now, another kind of thinking would be the black and white thinking that goes along very much with our judgments of others. So we might see someone who's not got their dressing act together, and they might rock up in a sort of tracksuit and sloppy jumper and for a meeting or something, and we would kind of go make judgments about them based on what we see. And my guess is they're probably being inaccurate. I often find that people might not represent themselves well through a dress code, but then you get to know them a little bit. And then it's the most entertaining, smart, intelligent, kind, thoughtful people. And when that happens, I always give myself good talking to, because I will have said, okay, well, smart means smart. And actually, it's not the case. You can have this super smart people who are absolutely not very nice to know at all. So we've got this sort of black and white. If it's A, then it must be B. If it's B, then it must have been A in the first place. And that's a little bit limited. And people who think in that way often need a little bit of help with expanding their thinking, and need help with being able to experience the joy of freeing yourself from just this black or white thinking, i.e., that life is one thing or the other. Very, very limiting. So the other way that we think can be very much based on our feelings and emotions. And, in life today, we're very much more aware of feelings and emotions in our inner life. And that, I think, is a good thing. But what can then start to happen is that we can run our lives by our feelings and emotions. And let me give you a good example, a personal example, because those will be the most accurate. Most mornings when I wake up, my first instance is, I don't want to get up, I want to stay in bed. Now, I don't do that. But if I was run by that feeling, I think I might even stay in bed all day, and very occasionally I do that. But I know people who are run by that tendency, and they get very, very caught in being withdrawn from life. And so we need to watch out that An emotion isn't giving us everything in terms of information about a situation. An emotion or a feeling or a thought will tend to be very personal to you. Now, nothing wrong with saying, well, personal to me is a thought or a feeling, but that's not telling you everything about your environment. And so I think that what we need to be given that we might wake up with the grumps or, or feeling incredibly joyful is just oh, that's really interesting. Did I contribute to that in some way? Is there something going on today that's made me feel that way? So again, it's about being more self-aware, engaging with our inner life, but it's not everything. There's always more information in our environment. And I see people interviewed who talk about, oh, it was my feeling this and my feeling that and my experience this and my experience that. And I actually think, how very boring. Have you got no other way of seeing the world through facts or through data or through what others are thinking and experiencing and through inquiring as to what others' felt sense of the world is like? I'm not decrying our felt sense of the world, but just notice it. We don't have to act on thoughts or feelings. And this is where people do go wrong. They immediately think, I must deal with that. I must act. If our mind is flowing, then things will change. Thoughts and feelings and experiences will move on. As we say in acceptance and commitment therapy, it's like the weather. The sky can be blue, and then at the end of the day, there can be a thunderstorm and it can rain, and then the out comes the sun again, and there can be a rainbow, and there can be euphoria, and then the next thing we know, we've got, the wind blowing or gusts, or the nuance of the weather is really changing just as the mind can change. So, don't get stuck with one thought or one feeling. Okay, and then you're excessively ruminating on one thought and one feeling. And excessive rumination, the loop, back to the loop, is what we will do. It will happen, but I'm suggesting just notice that loop. Notice your favorite loop. Notice recurring loops. Notice other people's loops. And just sort of see if you can unloosen those loops a little bit and find a fresh place to be. And that could lead to more mental freedom, more learning. Now, what I'm always saying to people so often, from any kind of experience or any kind of mental experience, any kind of life experience, is right now, what do you feel you've learned from that? And it's what we learn from things that really matters in the end. It's how we take that forward. And it's how we complete the story of what is happening in our mind. Many times in my work, whilst I'm exploring thoughts with people, and I love to be able to categorize thoughts, really what the brain is doing is telling the story of now. And I love to listen to stories. What is your story right now? How is that story looking? And how are you telling that story to yourself? And ultimately, this is about how you tell stories to yourself and whether or not you're able to find talking to yourself a comfortable and nurturing experience, whether you can make thinking possible. Sometimes it's for sure we're going to think difficult thoughts. Yeah. Sometimes we're going to have worried thoughts. Sometimes we're going to have deeply concerned thoughts. Of course we are. But it's how we complete the cycle of those thinking that matters. So that at the end of each day, you can go to bed and say, I was thinking this and I've managed to organize that into a particular shape. And if you haven't, there's never mind because I'll come back to it tomorrow. So one of the first things that I learned about cognitive behavioral therapy was how do you talk to yourself about things? And I am imploring you to notice more about how you talk to yourself about things. Okay, so let's start winding this up. We're all prone to thinking distortions. Our thinking isn't necessarily accurate and can be misleading. It is especially inaccurate when we are under pressure or when we're depressed or when we're under stress, and they get more exaggerated and our thinking blows things out of proportion. And so the first thing to do is to be able to say, am I actually on track with my thinking? Now, I know, and you know, that that's really quite difficult to do if you're panic stricken or if you are triggered or if you're afraid, particularly if you're very afraid. It's really hard to think rationally when an emotion hijacks you. So that's the piece we have to also put in here, that you have to make allowances for the emotion. And so just a piece of advice is to be able to say to yourself, don't do anything, don't react, don't write emails, don't get texting, don't do anything for at least 20 minutes when you are hijacked by an emotion, because you're going to do better if you slow things down and let the other side of your brain come into play, that your brain's actually looking after you and wants you to do the right thing. And again, we all know what it's like to shoot off one of those communications to people and you think, oh no, now I've got twice the mess to deal with if our thinking's out of proportion. We can get very rigid in our thinking. We can get very fixed in our rules and in the way things should be this way, things ought to be this way, and things must be that way. And that sort of thinking, that rigid, fixed thinking's fine. Sometimes that's really, really helpful. But other times it's not the right kind of thinking at all. So you've got to watch out for that. And another area where I would direct you to is to be able to practice some tolerance of situations, because one of the reasons we react is because we immediately think we can't tolerate things, we won't put up with things. So we need to help ourselves click into our observing brain. We need to observe things more. And I always say, get more information about what's going on before you start reacting, or notice your reaction and then use your observing brain to notice what is happening around you. Maybe score some notes, maybe talk with someone who will help you. But generally, in this day and age, we have a low frustration tolerance, and it's something we're all going to have to work on. We're going to have to help our children work on that. It's just like, no, hold back. You can't have things right now. This is why we get triggered. We think we're going to die if we don't have it now. Sometimes we might, but not always. And that's pretty unusual. Thinking about emotional tolerance and just breathing your way through. Now, there's nothing worse when you're triggered than having someone tell you to breathe, is there? The only person needs to be telling you to breathe is you, so that you slow the whole thing down and that you take actions that are going to help you not get in your own way, that you're not destructive when you have thinking distortions. You know what I'm talking about. We all know what we're talking about. Those times when it all gets out of control. My words that I always use are, don't make this worse. Do nothing right now. Don't make this worse. Do nothing right now, unless you're, of course, in danger. So that is our little journey around being more aware of thinking. Now, again, as with mindfulness, if it was all that simple, we'd all have the answers and we'd all be much, much better, wouldn't we? But it's not that simple. It is a craft. It is a craft of mindfulness. It's a craft of thinking. It is a craft of pulling your life together so that you get your responses more right, but most of all, more right for you. We're always discontent with ourselves if our responses are out of line. So we're getting this right for you. It's a journey. You don't do this in one stop. It's something we have to keep practicing, bring yourself back to all the time. Don't be afraid. Also, categorizing your thinking is simple when you're in a great mood. So I bet right now you're thinking, yeah, I can do that. I mean, I can identify my thinking distortions, but wait until you're next in a triggered state and then it's not so easy. So that's why I say always give yourself time. Good luck with your thinking and good luck with creating small steps towards your better life. And I can't wait till I see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Check out the next episode on our platform. Don't forget, I'm a doctor of psychotherapy, not medicine or clinical psychology. My expertise lies in the field of applied psychology through psychotherapeutic models of practice. This podcast is not intended for diagnosis or treatment of any kind. If you are concerned about your mental health, do consult your doctor, who will guide you. If you are ever in a mental health crisis within the UK, dial 999. In all other parts of the world, check your mental health facilities or turn to someone who will support you.